Mr. Carson, if poor people could do more with less, there would be no poor people. Poor people are not poor because they choose to be. Sir, you have indicated that there will be substantial cuts to the budget that HUD has. Can you give me that dollar amount? I'm showing that it's about $6 billion. Is that correct?
That's about right.
Is that about 13% of the budget?
Yes.
And will these cuts, Mr. Carson, come from public housing, housing vouchers, community development block grants, and other aid to low-income persons?
They come from a variety of sources, including...
How much from public housing, Mr. Carson?
Probably in the neighborhood of, if you combine all the programs, $2 to $3 billion.
$2 to $3 billion. How much from housing vouchers, Mr. Carson?
Rather than go through a quiz on all the numbers...
It's not a quiz, Mr. Carson. I have the time to ask you questions about things that you should have some knowledge of. If you have no knowledge of them, you can simply say so. I'll accept it as an answer. But this is something that's within your bailiwick, my dear sir. How much from housing vouchers?
Again, you know, I can give you that number, but...
Well, if you would give it to me, I would greatly appreciate it, because I'd like to go on to community development block grants.
Well, here's my point. I agree with you that it's difficult to do these things.
That has little to do with my question. You're answering a question that I'm not asking, to be quite candid with you. So would you kindly tell me how much HUD how much you're going to cut from the HUD budget as it relates to housing vouchers? Now, if you don't know, it's okay to say you don't know, Mr. Carson. I don't hold you to things that you don't know. How much are they going to cut?
Let's just move on and say that I don't want to offer a number because it's subject to...
Why would the Secretary of HUD not give the number, the amount that you're cutting from housing vouchers, Mr. Carson?
Because
you're the Secretary of HUD.
Because
you're making the cut.
Because we've already talked about the total amount of the cuts.
Well, the total amount does not help me when it comes to the housing vouchers. I have people who use housing vouchers, and I need to be able to explain to them, Mr. Carson, how much the cut portends for them. How much, Mr. Carson?
Let's hear your number.
Well, Mr. Carson, forgive me for coughing while speaking, but Mr. Carson, you're the witness testifying today. And if you want a moment to ask someone behind you, I would gladly accord you that moment.
I don't want to open the book and look at the numbers.
I see. So you choose not to say how much you're cutting from housing vouchers, or how much you're cutting from community block grants, Mr. Carson?
I want to talk about...
Mr. Carson, you don't get to talk about what you want to today. You get to talk about what I want you to talk about. You get to answer the questions that I pose, Mr. Carson.
Yeah, but I also get to answer the question the way I want to.
Well, you can answer them the way you want, but if you want to show a lack of knowledge, you can do this. It's quite all right, Mr. Carson. So now, how much from community development block grants, Mr. Secretary?
Again, I'm not willing to sit there and...
So you don't know how much from community development block grants?
I'm not going to go through the list, this much, and this much. I think that's
I'll move on, Mr. Carson. I accept your lack of knowledge.